My son mocked me at the airport, so I told his dark secret over the intercom. That's what you're about to hear. Not gossip, not a petty spat. A moment where years of quiet sacrifice met one public insult. And I chose to end it right there, for everyone to hear. The fluorescent lights of the terminal were harsh that morning, bouncing off every surface. I was already tired. Travel at my age isn't kind, but I was excited. My son had insisted I come along for this family trip. Said it would be fun, said I'd be part of the group. But in the middle of that crowded gate, he laughed at me. Not a chuckle, not a slip. A full, mocking performance, loud enough for strangers to turn, loud enough for me to feel the sting burn down to my bones. He imitated my voice, my walk, even the way I hold my bag. His friends, yes, he'd brought them too, laughed right along. And there I stood, the woman who had carried him, fed him, and bailed him out of mistakes no one else even knew about. I didn't shout. I didn't demand an apology. I just looked at him. And in that moment, I knew I wasn't going to swallow it this time. They forgot whose name was on the deed. They forgot who paid for the trip. They forgot the secrets I'd kept for them, the kind that could change how people see you forever. And they were about to remember. The intercom was only a few steps away. One quiet conversation with the attendant. One short message over the speaker system. And the entire gate, hundreds of strangers, would hear what my son thought was buried forever. I didn't complain, I adjusted. But that day, I adjusted differently. I'm the mother in this story, the woman who gave her best years to raising a boy who became a man I barely recognize. I didn't raise a child to turn into a stranger. What you're about to hear isn't just about an airport, it's about decades, about love stretched too thin, about a betrayal so public it demanded an answer. And the answer came in my voice, calm and clear, echoing over the terminal speakers. If you've ever been mocked, dismissed, or treated like a burden by the very people you gave everything to, stay right here. You're going to want to hear how this ends. And if my story strikes a nerve, subscribe. Because nobody tells our side better than we do. Before that airport moment, before the mocking, before the intercom, there were years, decades actually, of giving, of bending, of making space for everyone else's needs before my own. I was 22 when I first held him, his tiny fists, his scrunched-up face, and me, making silent promises I intended to keep for life. I wasn't rich, I wasn't extraordinary, but I was determined. I gave up my space, I gave up my name, I gave up my place in the world so he could have his. His father left early, too early, and in that silence, I stepped into every role: mother, father, teacher, nurse, banker, chauffeur, cheerleader. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. I skipped dinners so he could have second helpings. My shoes had holes while his had brand new laces. I didn't complain. I adjusted. When the school called because he'd fallen behind, I stayed up all night helping him catch up. When he made mistakes that could have followed him forever, I handled them quietly. No judgment, no lecture, just action. When he wanted to chase dreams that didn't pay a cent, I was the one cheering in the empty stands. I chose silence, not weakness. Birthdays, holidays, even small wins. I celebrated him more than myself. The house was full of his trophies, his posters, his friends. My only space was a small corner of the kitchen, where my tea often went cold before I could drink it. Cold tea became normal. And still, I thought that was enough. I thought love, consistent, patient love, would grow into respect. But somewhere along the way, respect faded. First it was little things, forgetting to call, missing visits. Then it became larger, dismissing my opinions, making decisions about my life without asking me. It was as if I had become background noise in his world. They forgot whose name was on the deed. Yes, the house he grew up in, the one he still claimed for holidays, was mine. Paid off in long, sleepless years. But lately, I was treated like a guest in it. I didn't raise a child to turn into a stranger. Yet here I was, watching him become someone I barely recognized. Still, I didn't push back. I told myself, maybe he's busy. Maybe it's just a phase. I poured the tea, let it grow cold, adjusted again. Until that morning at the airport, when every sacrifice, every unspoken hurt, and every ignored boundary came rushing back in one flash of humiliation. That was when I realized quiet love has limits. And mine had just reached its edge. It started small, a missed phone call, a forgotten birthday, and I'll visit next week. That never happened. I told myself he was busy. Work, friends, life. I made excuses for him, but it kept happening. When he did call, it was rushed. I could hear the typing in the background, the distracted replies. I stopped telling long stories. He didn't notice. Holidays changed too. No more quiet mornings together. No helping me in the kitchen. He'd show up late, leave early. Sometimes he didn't come at all. When he did visit, his eyes were on his phone, scrolling, texting, laughing at something I couldn't see. I stopped asking. The house felt colder, not just the air, the space between us, the silence after he left. He started making jokes at my expense, small at first. Mom's old-fashioned. Mom doesn't get it. Everyone laughed. I forced a smile. Then the jokes grew sharper. Mom's paranoid. Mom's too sensitive, said in front of friends, in front of the family. I stopped inviting people over. He made plans without asking me, moved things in my house, threw away items I had kept for years. They forgot whose name was on the deed. He borrowed money, promised to pay it back. He didn't. I didn't ask again. I adjusted. Again. I gave him my best years. He gave me his coldest days. When I spoke, he interrupted. When I asked for help, he was too busy. When I shared news, he changed the subject. I became background noise. I told myself it wasn't personal, but deep down it was. It always is. The distance grew, not measured in miles, measured in care. I realized he didn't just forget to call. He forgot who I was. Still, I kept pouring tea. Still, I let it go cold. Still, I chose silence. But silence has an expiration date. And mine was coming soon. It wasn't just in private anymore. The little cuts began to happen in front of others. And somehow, that hurt more. Family gatherings turned into stages, and I was the punchline. Mom still writes checks. Mom doesn't know how to use Wi-Fi. Everyone laughed. Even him. I laughed too. But inside it burned. At the grocery store, he rolled his eyes, told the cashier, "She's slow, be patient." I wasn't slow, I was careful. At a restaurant, he ordered for me, didn't ask what I wanted. Choose the cheapest item, said, "You don't eat much anyway." I lost my appetite. When friends came over, he told funny stories about the time I got lost driving, about how I fell asleep watching TV, twisting my moments into comedy. They laughed louder when I blushed. He started mocking my clothes. Mom dresses like it's 1985. I dress for comfort, not approval, but that didn't matter to him. Once at the airport, it escalated. We were waiting for our flight. He joked loud enough for strangers to hear. "Careful, everyone. My mom's a control freak." The people around us chuckled. I felt my face go hot. I sat there, holding my tea, cold again, always cold. He didn't notice, or maybe he did, and didn't care. When I tried to speak up, he waved me off. "It's just a joke. It's not that deep. It's how I show love." But love doesn't feel like shame. Even in public, he talked over me, introduced me wrong. Forgot to mention I was the one who raised him alone. Forgot to mention I worked double shifts to put him through school. He remembered everything I did wrong, and made sure others did too. I started avoiding events, stopped going to places where he might embarrass me. People thought I was getting old, fragile. No, I was just tired. Tired of being small in my own life. Tired of watching him chip away at my dignity. I didn't raise a child to turn into a stranger. The worst part? He seemed proud of himself, like making me the butt of every joke made him clever. He forgot whose name was on the deed. And soon, He would remember. It started quietly, like dust settling on furniture. You don't notice it at first. Then one day, it's everywhere. He stopped calling unless he needed something, a ride, money, favors. The visits grew shorter, the conversation thinner. His eyes were always on his phone. Holidays became optional for him. Birthdays, a quick text, sometimes late, sometimes not at all. I kept the traditions alive alone, the decorations, the dinners, the candles. But the chairs stayed empty. I told myself he was busy, work, friends, life. But truthfully, I was being set aside. When neighbors asked about him, I lied. Oh, he's doing great. Oh, we talk all the time. I couldn't admit the truth. I didn't complain. I adjusted. Then came the day that broke something inside me. I'd been feeling unwell for weeks, a heaviness in my chest, the kind of thing you don't ignore at my age. I called him, told him I might need to see a doctor. There was a pause. Then he said, "I'm swamped. Can you call an Uber?" Not. "Are you okay?" Not. "I'll be right there." Just a brush off. I hung up, sat there staring at the wall, realized I could fall, be gone for hours. And he wouldn't know. That night, I made soup for myself. A single bowl, in a silent kitchen. I thought about all the nights I stayed up sewing costumes for school plays. All morning, I woke up early to pack lunches. All the times I skipped meals so he could eat. I gave them my best years. They gave me their coldest days. The next week, I saw him again, by chance at a cafe. He was with friends, laughing, alive. When he saw me, he smiled. But it wasn't warm. It was the smile you give a stranger you recognize from somewhere. He waved me over, introduced me as the woman who nags me the most. Everyone laughed. I didn't. In that moment, I understood. I wasn't his safe place anymore. I wasn't even his person. I was his punchline. And the thing about punchlines? They end the story, but mine wasn't ending yet. Not like this. I didn't cry that night, not a single tear. I just sat in my chair, hands folded, listening to the clock tick. The kettle on the stove had gone cold. So had I. This was not rage. This was clarity. I'd spent decades giving, time, money, energy, pieces of myself I couldn't get back. And in return, a son who mocked me at a cafe. A son who could look me in the eye and still see nothing worth respecting. They forgot whose name was on the deed. I made tea, drank it slowly, let the warmth move through me like armor. No yelling, no scene, no phone call to set things straight. I chose silence, not weakness. Silence would give me space to think, to plan, to remember exactly who I was. Before they convinced me, I was small. I began to take stock, not just of my finances, but of my leverage, what I owned, what I knew, what they had forgotten about me. They saw me as a background character in their lives, but background characters can change the ending if they choose. I started small, clearing old papers from my desk, sorting boxes in the attic, noticing things they'd taken for granted for years, the photo albums, the property documents, the letters they never knew existed. Every drawer I opened, every box I sifted through, it was like finding little seeds of power, seeds I could plant later. I began writing things down, not a diary, a record, dates, events, words spoken, promises broken. It wasn't for them, it was for me, so I would never again forget the truth and let them rewrite it. Days passed. I kept my face calm, kept my words polite. On the phone, I listened more than I spoke. At family dinners, I let them talk over me. The less they noticed me, the more room I had to prepare. I didn't raise a child to turn into a stranger, but if he wanted to treat me like one, I could be a stranger he'd never see coming. The shift inside me was quiet, but absolute. I was done waiting for him to change, done hoping for calls that never came, done swallowing disrespect like medicine. From here on, everything I did would be deliberate, measured, precise. They thought I was sitting still, but I was moving pieces. They didn't even know they were on the board. This was no longer about getting him to love me. It was about reminding him who I was. and what I was capable of. It began with a list, not of chores, not of groceries, a list of truths. Every favor I'd done, every bill I'd paid, every sacrifice they'd forgotten. I wrote them in neat, even handwriting. 1 page turned into 3, 3 turned into 10, not for them to see, not yet, but for me to carry like a shield, because when you forget what you've given, it's easy to believe you owe more. I owed nothing. Next came the locks. The drawer in my bedroom, the one with the property deeds, the insurance papers, and a few things they didn't even know existed. Got a new lock. They thought everything in this house was theirs. They forgot whose name was on the deed. I stopped sharing my schedule. If they called, I let it ring. If they texted, I waited hours before replying. Distance isn't always miles. Sometimes it's minutes, deliberate minutes. Then I opened a new bank account. Quietly, alone, just in my name. A place for the little extra money I'd been careful to set aside for years. Money they didn't know I had. Money they couldn't touch. It wasn't revenge yet. It was the foundation. I began to notice their patterns. When they asked for things. What tone did they use when they wanted my help? How quickly their kindness faded. Once they got what they came for. Observation is power, and I was gathering plenty. I still cooked Sunday dinner, still set the table, still smiled when they walked in, because this wasn't about storming out. It was about holding the door open and deciding when, and if, it would close again. And all the while, I kept my voice calm. My tone is steady. My eyes are clear. They thought my silence meant surrender. It didn't. It meant strategy. Because the next time my son laughed at me, the next time he tried to turn me into a joke, I would not swallow my pride. I would not sit there and take it. I would answer, not with shouting, but with truth. Truth so sharp it would cut clean. That moment was coming. I could feel it in my bones, and when it came, I would be ready. If you've ever felt pushed aside by the people you gave everything to, you're not alone. Subscribe. Revenge doesn't start with a bang. It starts with a whisper. I knew if I wanted it to work, it had to feel natural, to them at least. So I started where they'd never notice, at the airport. Not yet that moment, not the intercom. That would come later. This was the warm-up. My son had booked himself a business trip. I knew it was more of a getaway with his friends. He still expected me to drive him. No please, no thank you, just a text with the time. I said yes, but on my terms. I drove him, but I took the long way. Not enough to make him miss the flight, just enough to make him anxious. And while we sat in traffic, I asked questions I already knew the answers to. About his job, his bills, his car loan. He gave short answers, rolled his eyes, like I was wasting his time. What he didn't realize was that I was memorizing every tell, every twitch, every tiny crack in his confidence. Back home, I made a second list. This one was different. This one was about him. The lies he'd told his friends, the favors he owed me, the moments he'd embarrassed me in public. Every detail had a time and place. I wasn't collecting for curiosity. I was collecting for leverage. Next, I visited the airport on my own. No suitcase, no flight, just me and a coffee. I walked through the terminals, listened to the rhythm of the announcements, the tone of the intercom. I watched how people stopped when a voice came over the speakers. Calm voice, loud reach. Everyone hears, everyone looks. It was perfect. I made friends with a desk clerk, small talk, a smile, a little story about needing to make an announcement one day for my family. She laughed, said it was no big deal, showed me how the system worked. Let me try the microphone once, just for fun. I didn't tell her the real reason. Some tools are too powerful to explain. From that day on, I carried a small folded paper in my bag. Inside was the line I'd say when the moment came, the truth I'd release to the whole airport. Because when my son tried to humiliate me again, he wouldn't just hear my answer. The world would. And the best part? It would be clean, legal, undeniable. I chose silence, not weakness, but when I finally spoke, it would be unforgettable. The days after my airport research trip were strangely quiet, too quiet. I kept to my routine, made my tea, watered my plants, folded laundry with care. But inside, I was a coiled spring. I knew it was coming, that next moment when my son would decide I was an easy target. He'd always been bold in public, poking fun, making little digs, thinking my smile meant I wasn't keeping score. Oh, I was keeping score. Weeks passed. I stayed patient. Patience is a weapon most people overlook. Then, the text. Short. No greeting, no softness. Can you drive me to the airport? 7 a.m. Don't be late. There it was. The invitation. The stage was being set without him even knowing. I didn't respond right away. Let him wait. 3 hours later, I typed back, "Sure, see you then." The night before the flight, I polished my plan, went over the steps, checked the folded paper in my purse, made sure it was still there. The words on that paper burned into my memory. I didn't even need to look, but I liked the feeling of having it close. The morning was cold. Fog clung to the streets. My car smelled faintly of the lavender sachet I'd tucked under the seat. I drove in silence. He sat beside me, scrolling his phone. No hello, no thanks for the ride, just thumbs flying across the screen. Halfway there, he started talking, but not to me. He was on a call with a friend, laughing about something funny I'd done last year at a family dinner, twisting it into a joke at my expense. I stared at the road, hands steady on the wheel. Let him have his little performance. When we reached the airport, I parked. He didn't get out right away, still laughing, still telling stories that weren't his to tell. And then, the line that lit the fuse. "She's harmless. She'd never embarrass me. Trust me." Oh, my dear boy. Trust you? No, not anymore. I walked with him inside, helped him with his bag. And then, while he fussed with his boarding pass, I slipped away. Straight to the desk clerk I'd met weeks ago. She remembered me, smiled, asked if I needed to make that announcement for my family. "Yes," I said softly. "It's time." My hand slid into my purse, found the folded paper. I could feel my heartbeat in my fingertips. He didn't know it yet, but the calm before the storm was over. The terminal was crowded, flights flashing on the board, suitcases rolling, announcements crackling overhead. And then there was me, standing at the counter, paper in hand, heart steady. The clerk took the note. She read it. Her eyebrows rose just slightly. Not in judgment, in understanding. "Are you sure?" she asked. I didn't blink. "I've never been more sure in my life." She nodded, picked up the microphone and pressed the button. The sound popped in the speakers. A hush seemed to ripple across the gate area. "Attention, passengers," her voice began, calm and clear. I stepped back, arms folded, eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on him. My son. He looked up at the sound, half interested at first, then recognition. The words spilled into the air, loud enough for every traveler, every gate agent, every family to hear. "This is a special announcement for a passenger at Gate 12. Passenger, your mother would like to remind you." She read my note exactly, word for word, the secret, the one he'd prayed I'd never say aloud, the one he'd hidden for years, shielding it with swagger and sarcasm. And now it was sailing over the intercom, clear as day, reaching every corner of the terminal. People turned, some smirked, some gasped, some tried to look like they weren't listening, but everyone was listening. He froze, phone in his hand, mouth open, color flooding his face. The clerk's voice was steady, almost gentle, but the weight of the words was undeniable. They landed on him like stones. When the announcement ended, a beat of silence followed. Then the noise of the terminal rushed back. But now it was different. There were whispers, glances. He looked at me, really looked, and for the first time in years, he didn't have a comeback. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply picked up my purse, turned, and walked toward the sliding doors. Behind me, I heard his voice, low, almost breaking. "Mom, wait." But I kept walking. Each step was quiet, measured, final. I had spoken without shouting, struck without raising my voice. and it had landed deeper than any argument ever could. I chose silence, not weakness, I whispered to myself. And for the first time in years, I felt the truth of it. The air felt heavier after the announcement. Not because of noise, but because of attention. Every eye that had casually passed over us before now lingered. Some curious, some entertained, some pitying. My son sat frozen. His phone is still in his hand. Like maybe if he stared at it long enough, he could pretend none of this had just happened. But he couldn't. Not when whispers traveled like wind through dry leaves. Not when I could see two young women at the gate covering their mouths, leaning into each other, glancing back at him. The swagger he wore so easily had vanished. He was smaller now, not physically, but in the presence. I stopped a few feet away, close enough for him to see me, far enough that he'd have to come to me if he wanted to speak. He didn't. Not yet. Instead, he ran a hand over his face as if he could wipe away the embarrassment. But the thing about truth, it doesn't smudge. I watched him glance at the clerk. Then the people were still watching. His shoulders tensed, then slumped. And there it was. The shift. Not in the crowd, but in him. The boy who mocked me at the check-in line, loud enough for strangers to hear. The boy who thought of my years, my love, my sacrifices were something to joke about, now sat quietly. I didn't need to tell him to lower his voice. Life had just done it for me. He finally stood, grabbing his bag. His steps were hesitant, a far cry from the stomping confidence he'd had an hour ago. When he reached me, his voice was low, almost careful. "You didn't have to do that," he said. I met his eyes, calm, level. I didn't have to, I chose to. He swallowed hard, looked down. I could almost see the calculations in his head. All the times he'd dismissed me, all the ways he'd assumed my silence meant surrender. The gate attendant called boarding for another flight. The sound jolted him. He glanced back at the crowd one last time, as if checking whether they were still watching. They were. We walked to our gate together. He kept his pace with mine this time. No rushing ahead, no rolling his eyes. And for the first time in years, he didn't fill the air with chatter. The silence between us, it wasn't cold. It was thoughtful. They forgot whose name was on the deed, I thought to myself. But today, he was starting to remember. Coming home was always routine. Drop the bags, hang the coats, kick off the shoes. But this time, the air inside the house felt different. Not thicker, just quieter, like the space between us still carried the weight of the airport. He didn't vanish to his room like before. He stayed in the living room, hovering, almost like he was waiting to be told what to do. It wasn't fear. It was awareness. I made tea, my ritual after any trip. And for the first time in years, he offered to help. A small thing, but it landed heavily. He didn't scroll on his phone while I spoke. He didn't cut me off mid-sentence. He listened. Really listened. At dinner, he set the table without being asked. Even took the smaller portion for himself. That was new. He asked how my knees were feeling after the travel. And he didn't just nod at my answer. He asked follow-up questions. Small, careful ones. It wasn't guilt in his eyes. It was something deeper. Recognition. For years, I had been the invisible scaffolding holding up his world, and he had been too busy leaning on it to notice it was there. But now, he'd felt the shift. The story of the airport had traveled faster than our flight home. A cousin texted me, "Heard what you did. Legendary." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. At the grocery store the next day, he walked beside me instead of rushing ahead. Carried the heavier bags without complaint. Even paid for them without a word. No grand apologies came from him. I didn't expect one. I wasn't looking for an "I'm sorry." I was looking for change. And it was here. But quiet victories are fragile things. They need space to grow. So I didn't gloat, didn't bring up the intercom, didn't remind him of the way his face flushed that day. Instead, I gave him room to let this new version of himself breathe. Sometimes the sharpest revenge isn't the moment you strike. It's watching the ripple it leaves behind. He didn't just treat me differently. He spoke about me differently. I overheard him on the phone with a friend. "Yeah, my mom's sharper than people think. You don't mess with her." I smiled quietly in the kitchen. That was enough for me. I chose silence, not weakness. And now he understood exactly what that meant. Respect doesn't always arrive with trumpets. Sometimes it walks in on tiptoe. After the airport, people looked at me differently, not with pity, not with the soft glaze they give to someone they've written off as harmless. It was sharper now, more deliberate. My son wasn't the only one who changed. The rest of the family, they noticed too. At Sunday dinner, he pulled out my chair before sitting down. That might sound small, but in all the years before, he had never done it. His cousins, who once teased me for being old-fashioned, now watched me carefully, like they didn't want to land on the wrong side of my attention. Conversations shifted. No more talking over me. No more brushing off my opinions with a chuckle. They paused when I spoke, waited, listened. And I noticed something else. The way my son's friends looked at me when they visited. They knew the story. Of course they did. He hadn't told them every detail, but enough for them to understand that I was not the type to be humiliated quietly. One of them, half joking, called me the Intercom Queen. I just smiled, let them have their nickname. If they wanted to turn my revenge into legend, I wouldn't stop them. Inside the house, things were calmer. No more sarcastic jabs from my son, no more dismissive laughter at my expense. Instead, he'd ask for my opinion on things that didn't concern me. A video he was making, a shirt he was thinking of buying. It was subtle, but I knew the truth. He was inviting me back into spaces he'd shut me out of. I didn't rush in, didn't grab the opportunity like a starving hand. I kept my pace slow, deliberate. Respect, when hard won, must be nurtured. You don't demand it every day. You let it grow roots. I remembered one of my favorite sayings. Never waste your power proving you have it. And so, I didn't bring up the airport. Not once. I didn't need to. Because now, when we passed through that same terminal weeks later, he carried my bag without me asking, held the door for me, and kept his voice low. No mocking tone, no careless smirk. He didn't apologize. He didn't have to. Every small act was an apology. I didn't raise a child to turn into a stranger. And now I was beginning to recognize him again. Revenge isn't finished when they stop mocking you. It's finished when they remember why they stopped. The airport stunt had shifted the balance. But I knew how people work. Memories fade. Old habits crawl back in when the sting wears off. So I decided on one last move. Quiet. Permanent. It began with a letter. Not to him, to the airline. I thanked them for their excellent public address system. Told them how it allowed me to resolve a family matter. The story amused them so much, they asked if they could feature it anonymously in their in-house magazine. I agreed. Weeks later, the piece was printed. Short, witty, my voice without my name. But here's the thing, people talk. And in our small circle, anonymous was a paper-thin veil. Friends of friends started sending him photos of the magazine. Hey, this sounds a lot like your mom. Winking emojis followed. It was perfect. Not humiliation, just a steady reminder that the moment lived on, that the story had legs. And he knew, every time someone smirked at him in a way they hadn't before, that the respect he gave me now wasn't just for home, it was for the world. I also made a subtle change in the house. A framed photo of us, from years ago, when his arm was thrown around me without embarrassment, now sat by the front door. He'd see it every time he left, every time he came home. A visual nudge, not guilt, memory, because this wasn't about breaking him. It was about restoring something I refused to live without. One night, as we sat in the living room, he asked, "Do you ever think you went too far that day?" I looked at him. Calm, steady. I think I went exactly far enough. And for the first time, He nodded. No smile, no sarcasm, just acceptance. They forgot whose name was on the deed. They forgot whose hands built the foundation. But they remember now. The last move wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was simply lasting. I had taken back my place, not through shouting, not through force, but through precision. I chose silence, not weakness. And I had made sure my silence would echo for years. The storm was over, not because he apologized, not because the world suddenly became fair, but because I decided it was over. Peace doesn't come from their change. It comes from your choice to stop carrying the weight. The airport moment, the whispers after the magazine piece, the quiet stares when people connected the dots. All of it had shifted something in him. He spoke to me differently now, not overly sweet, not forced, just respectful. I noticed it in the small ways, how he asked instead of assuming, how he listened instead of waiting to talk, how he introduced me to others, no longer as a side note but with pride. I didn't raise a child to turn into a stranger, and I wasn't about to let him stay one. There were still moments, of course, times when the old tone crept back, but I didn't need to fight them anymore, because he caught himself. That was the difference. Some might say revenge is about making the other person hurt. I don't believe that. Not real revenge. Real revenge is when they remember, when the lesson becomes part of the air they breathe. And in that quiet victory, I found my peace. I gave them my best years. They gave me their coldest days, but I had warmed my own world again, without waiting for their permission. Sometimes justice isn't loud. It's a whisper that never fades. I don't tell this story to boast.
I tell it because too many of us swallow our hurt. We let disrespect stack up, brick by brick, until we're walled in by silence. But silence isn't weakness. It's a tool. And in the right hands, it can move mountains. I didn't scream at the airport. I didn't cry. I simply handed him the truth in front of strangers and let it stand there, unshakable. She found her voice in silence. If that moved you, hit subscribe. Your story matters. And sometimes your quietest move will be your strongest one.